Welcome everyone. It is so nice to see you here at the State Library. My name is Bethany. I work in the audience engagement branch as a producer. I'll just let you know we are waiting on a couple more school groups, so they'll probably just come in a little bit later and we can just seat them. But we thought we'd kick off, get things started, and I would like to introduce Angarad Wynne-Jones, who is the head of audience engagement, and she will give you a little bit of a welcome, tell you a little bit about the library. Have any of you been here before? One, two, oh hang on, I saw a little hand. Oh yeah, some of you guys have. That's great to see. It's nice to have you back. And for anyone who hasn't been here before, welcome. I'm glad you had the chance to come and visit us here. Also, just one thing to let you know, there are some people who are watching online. We are live streaming this. Unfortunately, our Auslan interpreter is unable to make it today, but we will be recording this live stream. There will be some captions, so if anyone wants to watch an accessible version of it later, that will be up on the State Library website. So now I'd like to introduce Angarad Wynne-Jones, the head of audience engagement.
Thanks, Bethany. Hello, everyone. Really great to see you here. I'm going to begin on behalf of the library to acknowledge the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans and their cultural practices and knowledge systems. We recognise that our collections hold traditional cultural knowledge belonging to Indigenous communities in Victoria and around the country. We support communities to protect the integrity of this information gathered from their ancestors in the colonial period. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, who have handed down these systems of practice to each new generation for millennia. You can probably tell that this library is an old building. It's a colonial institution. And despite its founding principle, which I think we would probably all respect, of free and accessible education for all, it is still part of the violent history of colonisation, which continues to have negative consequences and impacts for First Nations peoples today. We are so deeply honoured to be hosting Blak and Bright here today. And I'd like to pay my respects to Jane Harrison, who's an extraordinary writer and enabling leader of this First Nations-led literary festival, and the creation of a platform for over 60 First Nations artists and writers to share their stories, their culture, their anger, their joys, and their speculations on the future. This library belongs to us all. At its best, it can be a holding place for our shared memories and knowledge, and support the creation of new memories and knowledge that will truly represent our history and our shared future, that honours, respects and celebrates the 60,000 plus years of continuous living culture that we are all so privileged to be connected to through living on these lands. I think you're up for an incredible conversation with these three extraordinary writers. You may feel challenged and uncomfortable as they share their experiences. You may recognise or connect with your own experiences. Whatever your response is, I hope you feel today the power of creativity and its ancient and ongoing capacity to transform us. I hope you have a wonderful day. Back to Bethany.
Hello, me again. I've just got some boring housekeeping things. These are related to the people who are with us, so anyone watching online, just bear with me for a second. This event in its entirety will run until 2:15. And just a little outline of what we'll be doing today. So we're going to start off with a panel session with the authors. You can see they're all ready to go. We're going to have a short break after that and move to some workshop sessions. So you'll actually break out into different groups. And at the same time as the workshop sessions, we'll also have some monologue performances in the theaterette. Your teachers will have been given a schedule that's got your locations and which groups you will be in. And if anyone has any questions, just ask any of the State Library staff. We'll have a quick lunch break. We've only got about half an hour for lunch, but I know I've seen teenagers eat. I know you're pretty good at eating quickly. And it's mainly because we've got so much we want to do because we want to have another session after lunch. And we're going to come back in here at the end of the day for some sharing time and a bit of a conclusion. So for the breakout sessions, if you have a workshop with Kirli Saunders, you will be here in the conversation quarter. If you have a workshop with Thomas Mayer, you will be in the create quarter. And if you have a workshop with Jared Thomas, a virtual workshop, you will be in the digital lab. So there will be staff who will be taking you to those sessions. Don't worry if you don't know where to go. The library is a very big place. So if you get lost, you can always ask people for directions. We can point you the right way to go. So just so you know, the toilets are located in the foyer of entry 3, so where you guys came in. So if you're in this space and you need to go to the toilet, you can just duck out the door over there. And if you're in another workshop space in the main part of the library, the main toilets are next to the lifts, just on the ground floor there. So one other bit of housekeeping, if there is an emergency, which we hope there is not, you will hear an emergency evacuation tone, probably similar to what you've got at school. It starts off as a beep, beep noise, and then it goes to a whoop, whoop, and that's when you know things are getting serious. What you have to do is listen to the instructions over the PA. They will tell you where to go. We've got lots of different exits to the building, so you just listen for instructions and they'll tell you the safest way to go, and you follow the little illuminated exit signs on your way out. We do have an emergency assembly area in the courtyard of RMIT, which is next to the Old Melbourne Jail. And if we do need to go to that area, the State Library staff will direct you where to go. Just so you guys know, your bags will be kept in the lockers in this space. So this room is sort of our base room for the day. This room will be locked when it's not in use. And if you need to access your bag at any time, just ask the State Library staff. And of course, you'll be able to get to them for break time and things like that. That's pretty much all from me. Now we get over to listening to the good stuff. I'd like to introduce Edie Wright, who's going to moderate this panel for us. And she's going to do a little bit of an introduction and introduce you to the wonderful authors that we have as part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name's Edie Wright, and I'm a Bardi person, and my people are saltwater people, and we come from a very remote part of Western Australia called the Kimberley, and if I said it was close to Broome, then probably a few of you will recognise the location. In my former life, I was actually in education for 30 plus years across state education system and private education systems. So, yeah, I know a little bit about education. I'd like to start by acknowledging the numerous and important language groups that make up the Kulin Nation here in Victoria. And I'd like to pay my respects to our elders, both past and present. And I'd like to welcome you from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And I'd like to pay respects to the courage, fortitude, and tenacity of First Nations people and ancestors. And I just hope that a little bit of that courage especially is with you today as you participate in the workshops. And please have the courage to ask us questions. No question is silly or unimportant, so please, there are questions you want to know about First Nations people, First Nation riders, please ask us. You may even want to come up to us privately and ask us a question, but you know, I'm very conscious that you people are the leaders of tomorrow, and we have a responsibility as First Nation people to help you along your journey so we can all have a brighter future together in the name of reconciliation. Thank you for coming, and also acknowledge these three great writers here with me and leaders, and also aware that Dr. Jared Thomas is isolating due to COVID. So our thoughts are with you, Jared. So while I'm with you, Jared, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that, those lovely words and introduction. So I'm Jared Thomas. I'm coming to you from Ghana, Miona country, Aldinga Beach in Adelaide, South Australia. I'm a Nukuna Nadri person of the Southern Flinders Ranges and mid-north of South Australia. My mother's Aboriginal family is from Winton in Queensland. I grew up in Port Augusta, and for much of my life I've been writing. So my first play was produced in Kenya and Uganda in 1999, a play called Flash Red Ford, and my first young adult novel was published in 2005, so 15 years ago. And one of my most recent works is my collection, the Game Day series, co-authored with Paddy Mills, Torres Strait Islander, Cookatha, Olympian basketball player for the Brooklyn Nets. So that's a little bit about me. The other thing is I taught Aboriginal literature at the University of South Australia for almost a decade as well, and I've just resumed some work there. So my professional work is as the curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander material, culture and art, which is a shared role with the South Australian Museum and the University of South Australia.
Thanks, Jared. Kirli.
Just fangirling over here. Jared, you're such an amazing writer. It's really, really lovely to be with everyone today. I'm a big fan of yours too, Tom and Edie. Oh, it's nice when you get to work with people you fan over, you know, and I don't think we do that enough, celebrate each other's achievements and our own. So Didri Gorani Nya Kirli Saunders Acknowledge Mirani Gananukang Kulin Nora Madung Puringiling Yangu. My family are Gunai, Yuan, Ganangara, Birapai and Gadigal people, so we have a history of displacement and removal. My grandmother's side are the Stevens down and Boldens and Clarks down Gunai country, so if anybody's from that area, hey. And it's also lovely to see some mob in the room. Yeah, it's always special when we get to be in the same space together, all of us. And I hope that sharing stories today inspires you to share your own. I'm a writer of poetry and picture book and plays. Poetry underpins every element of my writing, and so in workshops today I'll be exploring poetry. Poetry was written by dead white guys when I was at school and had nothing to do with me, and so I'm very interested in shifting the narrative away from colonial explorations of country and identity and into supporting young people to explore indigeneity and queerness and feminism and decolonisation. So that's a little bit about what I'll be yarning on today. And yeah, just glad to be here.
Your turn, Jared.
Thomas. So I'm Thomas. My name's Thomas Mayer. I come from Larrakia country up in Darwin, and I'm a Torres Strait Islander. So Kapul Goiga, that means good morning. Is there any other Torres Strait Islanders here? No? Okay, I'm it. So right up the tip of Cape York is the Torres Strait. It's in between Papua New Guinea and the Australian mainland, all the little tiny islands there. That's where my mob are from. I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation, and their elders past and present. My background is I went to year 12, finished school then. When I was 17, I became a wharfie, so my job for 16 years was basically just loading and unloading ships, driving big cranes and doing manual work, and I never ever thought that I'd be sitting here in front of students talking about writing, something I never thought I'd do. So just keep that in mind, you know, you never know what will happen. And so, yeah, I've written 4 books. 2 of them are children's books. They're about the Uluru Statement. They're about First Nations rights and history, and also about fatherhood and masculinity, and I've written some poetry as well. I thought I'd have a go at that. My background was very much, a rugby player and, as I said, a wharfie. But writing has opened my eyes to so much. I'm also a trade union official of the Maritime Union. So unions are just collectives of workers that pool their resources basically and their collective power to achieve things for their own wages and conditions. But in Australia, unions are also important to fighting for social justice, and it's something I'm really proud of as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And now that I've got the unthinkable out of the way, and let's really get cracking. Let's start with exploring what prompted each of the writers. Why write? What was your passion? Did you always feel as though you were born to write? So let's explore that first, and have a yarn around that.
Well, I want to hear from you, Auntie.
Pardon?
When did you start writing? Go on.
I'm supposed to be moderating. No.
I think you should always ask questions of the moderator right back, right? Because there's a reason you're moderating, and I'd love to know it.
I got into writing. I always knew there was a story to be told, and I'm a believer that everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a what I use the word fortunate life, because that's a novel back in WA that always sat with me. But and then that sense of knowing that was really taken to the next level when I did a unit when I was doing my dip teach on history, and one of the assignments was exploring your own family's history. So, and that got me thinking, and part of that research was always a journey for me too, in terms of knowing and understanding the past policies and practices and how that impacted on my family, because I was never aware of the past policies and the practices until I started to write and until I started to research. So that's what got me into writing. And like Thomas, if you'd have told me as a 12-year-old student, well, one day you'll be up there sharing your writing and why and what's the purpose for it, I would have thought, no, I'm just a little country girl. So it was more about the journey, and now it's moved more to about the work that Thomas knows so well around the truth-telling, is getting our stories out there so people like yourself, people understand the truth between race relations, firstly between First Nations people and the colonisers. So that's what got me into it. And
Just that little old thing. That's amazing. I want to hear from you. Go on.
Kirli's taken over the moderating here, aren't he?
I love it.
No, I started writing because I really believed in something so much that I thought it was an important thing to do. When the Uluru Statement came out in 2017, 26th of May, it was almost immediately dismissed by the government. But as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, having, in the process that led to the Uluru Statement, really deeply thought about the history of our struggle, we knew that the politicians were going to say no to what we had to propose, which is, to change the constitution to guarantee us, to give us a constitutional right to a voice in this country and to be heard. And the Uluru Statement is a canvas, it's 1.6 by 1.8 metres, and I was entrusted with this sacred document and to travel around the country with it for 18 months. And the union supported me to do that because we had no money for campaigning then. And after being on the road for 12 months, I thought, there's some really wonderful people that I've met on this journey, and they have really moved me. And I knew that writing was something that, you know, reached people and could move people. And so I suggested to Marcia Langton, if you've heard of her, that, you know, I've got this idea, and Marcia set me up with a publisher, and away I went. I think the first time that I really enjoyed writing, and it's something that really stands out as a memory, you know, in year 11, I think it was, yeah, year 11, we were doing, and I never did real good at school, you know, I like to play up a bit and all that. But when we did a descriptive writing test sort of thing, and I remember it clicking in my mind that if I just write some big words and you know, I can make things up, and I can, you know, and so I think that was one moment in my school days in English that led to me being confident enough to write when I had something that I really wanted to say.
Thank you. How about you, Jared?
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit similar to what everyone said, but I guess as a young person, as a teenager, I started to ask a lot of questions about situations in my community, and particularly my family situation. So Port Augusta is a place where there's over 27 different Aboriginal language groups, and we make up a fifth of the population. Many people have described it as one of the most racist towns in Australia. So during the period of the 67 referendum, Port Augusta was one of the places in Australia with the most votes voting against the rights of inclusion of Aboriginal people in the Constitution. Like Thomas, my maternal grandfather, an Aboriginal Irishman, was a trade unionist, and really encouraged me to question and speak up. And yeah, as a kid, there wasn't a whole lot of, there certainly wasn't Netflix. There wasn't a whole lot of television in Port Augusta, but there was ABC. And one of the things that I was really interested in was looking at the plight of Nelson Mandela. So Nelson was still imprisoned at that particular time. And I was looking at apartheid, and I was thinking, it's kind of like apartheid where I live. Why are my family members so poor? Why are so many of my people imprisoned? Why isn't there any Aboriginal people working at the Woolies, or in the bank, or the butchers, or the clothes stores? And the racism was so, it still kind of is, it's improved a lot, but it was very pervasive. And so for me, it was a challenge of how do I tell non-Aboriginal people what we're about? That some of us really want to do well at school, that we want to work. A lot of our people do work hard. So challenging all of those stereotypes, I think that was the big getting point. And, you know, speaking with my parents and my grandfathers in particular, looking at the injustices they'd experienced. The really hard stuff isn't so long ago. I'm only 6th generation since colonisation. So the period of my great-grandparents, they were institutionalised. They were placed in missions. So I wanted to be able to communicate to the people around me what is the history of Aboriginal Australia? Because a lot of people, I felt, wanted to blame our disadvantage on us and to not acknowledge the role of non-Aboriginal Australia in our disadvantage. So that, you know, as a kid, that's what I wanted to do. I started writing very seriously when I was 17, and by 23, had my first play published in Australia, and have published something like 10 books since.
That's amazing. Yeah, I echo all of these threads. I think when I first started writing, I was about that age too. Jared, 17, I was writing poetry and longer form poems. And at 19, while I was studying primary teaching, I would just spend a heap of time in the library at the resources centre within the university reading all these kids' books. And so I was writing heaps of them, and I sent a book over to Sean Tan, this manuscript I'd written because I admire Sean, and said, hey, can you give me feedback? Not knowing this fella. And he wrote a letter back. It was really encouraging and gave me some feedback. And then at 22, the same thing again. I was going through a rough period of severe anxiety and depression. I just started teaching full-time, and I felt this real pressure to be an exceptional leader and teacher in a classroom, and I was so young and had like 36-year-olds. And I felt really overwhelmed by the experience and wasn't sure how to navigate being new in a town that I'd just moved to, away from my friends and family, away from sport, and just started riding my motorbike. And my motorbike took me to all these incredible places, and I sat down one day and poured this manuscript out onto the page about this experience of freedom-seeking and joy and elation from being connected to the earth and this machine. And I sent it over to Matt Otley and said, dear Matt, be my illustrator. And I'm not sure if you know Matt, but both Matt and Sean are, really incredible illustrators, very well awarded and celebrated. And I waited months, and I'm like, that was gammon. Like, this fella's never going to write back. What are you doing sending emails to people you don't know? And he did. It took like 2 months, but he wrote back, hey, Kirli, I love this. Let's take this to Scholastic. And it's since been published in 5 languages. And I tell you that story because if I can write a book without any formalised training as a writer and have it published, then I think you can too. And since then I've moved more into my poetry and more into sharing cultural stories, and have found a lot of peace and joy on that path of connecting to culture and honouring having brown people in books, really, because I didn't grow up with that. And Bindi is a book about a young girl who lives on Gundungurra country and speaks Gundungurra language, and it's about climate change and caring for country. And Kindred is a poetry collection about my experience, so more YA adult sort of poetry. And I've got 10 books on the way, all under contract, and 2 coming out this year. And if you'd have told me one day you're going to grow up and be a writer, I would have laughed, because I grew up not thinking I could write. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. They really are outstanding ways to get into writing. I'm throwing the panel in the deep end now, but can you share with our audience a time during your writing, a poignant time, or a time when you went through an emotional shift, or something that you discovered and has sat with you? Can you sort of share with the audience that whole journey of going through writing?
I've got a bit of a story, if that's okay. So with one of my books, so with this particular book, Calypso Summer, so I'd written a couple of other books before setting off on that book, which was my second young adult novel. So I think, Sweet Guy, this is my first novel. It was shortlisted for a South Australian Victorian Premier's Literature Award. And then I had another little book, Dallas Davis, The Scientist and the City Kids. And then I came to write Calypso Summer. And I'd written a few other plays and had poetry published and stuff by then. And I was teaching at University of South Australia. I was teaching creative writing as an Australian film and literature. And with that particular book, I wrote it and I handed it to the agent that I had then, who was regarded as one of the best agents in the country. And all of the publishers wouldn't take it on. No one wanted to accept it. And it was very hard. Just thinking, I'm at the university, I'm teaching, and I feel like a pretender. Because this book that I've spent a lot of time on, I can't get published. And the other pressure is that when I wrote this book, because it has elements of Jamaican culture, Rastafarianism, I went to Jamaica to write this book. So I was mentored by Olive Senior, who's a Jamaican writer in her 80s, who's friends with Bob Marley, lived across the road from Bob Marley on Hope Road, Trenchtown in Kingston. So I had this incredible experience, but I couldn't get this book published. So I went away and I spent 6 months completely rewriting it. And then I put it in the State Library of Queensland Black and White Award. And a few months later, I was called up and the staff there said, "Congratulations, Jared, you've just won the Black and White Award. It's $10,000 prize money plus publication." And I cried there in my office. And I was just really proud of myself for persevering. And I completely rewrote the story. I brought it up to another level of quality. And that's what writing's all about. Most writers, we don't sit down and write the perfect sentence straight away, but we work hard and we refine to tell the best story we can. The story went on to, so Calypso Summer went on to win a White Raven Award, which is given by the International Youth Library for books deserving worldwide attention and books of high artistic merit. So yeah, for me, that was a real game changer in knowing that writing isn't just about having a good story, it's about the craft connected to good storytelling and not giving up. It's the most important lesson in life. If you want to do something and you want to succeed, do not give up.
Thanks, Jared. How about you, Kirli? I'm sure there are lots of interesting moments.
There are a lot on the path, aren't they? I guess one moment that sticks out is I was on the banks of Bungali, the Shoalhaven River, over on the south coast of New South Wales, and I heard ancestors sing for the first time. And it's a really strange experience, and if you've had it, you know what I'm talking about. But I called one of my aunties and was like, "Hey, I think I'm going mad. I can hear voices." She's like, "Well, you're not mad, all right? Like, hearing voices is you listening to intuition and spirit, firstly. Secondly, what are they saying?" I said, "Oh, Auntie, I don't know. It's all in language." And she said, "Well, that's what they're saying. It's time to go and learn language." And so I started my language learning journey. My mum was removed as a state ward and raised, as a child and raised as a state ward in children's homes. And so connection to culture and language has been something that we've been held away from through institutionalisation in our family. And learning language made me want to encourage other children to do the same thing. And so I created a project called Poetry in First Languages, which was run in 12 different communities, 12 different languages, and for 600 students across 60 workshops, where elders and students came together to write poems in language. And while we were doing that, we were planting these she oaks to protect the glossy black cockatoo, which is a bird, Bujan, there on Gunungara country. And I was going through all of this language learning, this tree planting, this, caring for country, and the bushfires whipped through Gunungara country, so the land I was born on, Gunai country, my grand's country, Biripi country, my pop's country, and pretty much everywhere in between, Ewan. All of my family ties, the places where we belong, were burnt. And the corridor that we'd planted to protect this bird was burnt out as well. And I'd written 2/3 of Bindi, and I scrapped the whole thing and started the book again from scratch, start to finish. And it is so much more responsive and so much more aligned to the story that I wanted to tell. So I think when you said you have to rewrite, Jared, I hear you. And those moments where fire and flood and climate change are really tangible, where spirit speaks and you listen and you pay attention to it, are really profound moments as a writer, and I think in life. And if you don't grab hold of them quick enough, I think sometimes they can run away and you miss them. So I just encourage, when the plot twist happens, embrace it.
Yeah, firstly, Kirli's work, her poetry, is something that inspired me to write poetry as well. I encourage you to follow Kirli's work. Just first, on a life lesson sort of thing for me, is that you've got these big moments in your life, and you grabbing those opportunities are important. But something I learnt also is that when you feel like you're actually not getting anywhere or doing anything special, it's actually part of your story and part of your experience, and that's going to inform, what you do later on and what you end up achieving. On a significant moment on my writing journey, I'd have to say my latest book, Dear Son, was a very, moving time. Dear Son is a collection, it's an anthology of letters from fathers to sons and some of us sons to fathers. And so I started writing that. First I had a go at writing a letter to my own son, who was 19-year-old at the time, and just a hugely, emotional experience. I knew that this would be a tough task because I wanted to be honest with my son about what I had done as a father and what I'd done, that I thought I'd done not right and what I could improve and try and teach him through that. And then I decided to conclude the whole book, so 12 other First Nations men write letters in this book, but the book concludes with a letter to my own father. And my father brought me up quite harshly, it was, and in writing the letter to my father and to my son, I explored what he was thinking, when he was raising me and why he might have raised me that way, and the influences of colonisation and harsh laws and all of those things, and just wanting to survive. And so it's my proudest work, I think it's something that moved me the most in my writing.
Thank you about that. I'm just conscious of time because I've been told that we do have to cut the session a bit short. But I'm really interested to hear from you all about how you see the role of writing by First Nation people, creators and authors and illustrators. How has that been in changing some of the myths that are out there about First Nations people? So I think you touched on that, Jared, when you spoke about stereotyping, some of the stereotyping.
Yep. Maybe if you allow Thomas and Kirli to speak, and then I'm just going to find something from just some information from my new novel. Actually, I've got it right here. If you just give me one sec. So, just a quote. This is from the publicity regarding my new novel, My Spare Heart. But I say, through the character of Phoebe, I also wanted to show the multi-dimensional life of a young Aboriginal person who enjoys contemporary culture, but also holds her culture close to her heart. So for me, when I'm writing these days, I do really want to show, the multi-dimensionality of Aboriginal people. So myself as a kid, I grew up enjoying Star Wars, BMX bikes and computer games, but would also love being out with my uncles and aunties and my dad and, learning about culture. So still today, there's, a lot of all the contemporary things that people like, and then I have my culture very close to my heart. So for me, just wanting to challenge a whole range of stereotypes through my writing and try to show as much as the last couple of my books I've had female characters as the main characters, and it's because I have daughters. I have 3 daughters, Tilly, Delilah and Banksia. And so for me, it's about showing people as much as I can what life is really like for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through my work with Paddy Mills. For us, it was really, for Paddy and I, it was important to represent both young men and women through our work.
Thank you, Jared. Thomas, you started too.
Yeah, just on the stereotype thing, that's what Dear Son is about as well. It's about, correcting the stereotype about Indigenous men, and how when I went to school, we were taught that our forefathers were savages and unintelligent, but the white kids in the same class were taught that their forefathers were scientists and explorers and our saviours, So, I think us writing is so important to turning those things around, Jared's work and sharing those different experiences and helping people think about that. And also I'm a writer of non-fiction, so I just love it when people come up to me and say, I never knew about, for example, the Blak Line in Tasmania, where, the colonisers marched across the countryside, rounding up Aboriginal people and just, it was genocide. About the, what do you call it, the leprosy places in Derby where Aboriginal people were kept and, lived their whole lives basically in these leprosariums. And people, we need to teach people about these things, so, it's such an important thing for us to write, us mob.
Mm-hmm. And picking up on the leprosarium, in Derby, WA, in the remote part near where Broome is, there was a leprosarium there where people who contracted leprosy had to go, and they stayed there, and some of them never left, they died there. Now, when I was going through COVID and all the lockdowns and everything, because my family was deeply affected by leprosy. My oldest brother and my youngest sister went into the leprosarium, and they spent my oldest brother had 2 sessions in the leprosarium, and he was there for about 30 years. My youngest sister was there for 10 years. And when I went through COVID, the parallels are astonishing. We had boundaries within boundaries. We were quarantined. We couldn't touch. I could never hug my older brother and my older sister. We had to use different mugs, different plates. We had to socially distance them. We had to meet them out in the hunting grounds. They couldn't come into town. There was even a legislation, what they call the leprosy line, where Aboriginal people couldn't move south of the 26th unless they had a doctor's certificate, and they were screened. Just as we had the rat, we had to be screened. So the parallels between the leprosy and what First Nations people suffered back between... The leprosarium was open for 50 years, from 35 to 85. The parallels of the way First Nations people were treated was astonishing when I look back on my experience here with COVID. And keeping in mind the courage of those people, my family and all the other Aboriginal families that went through the leprosarium in those 50 years. Many died there. Babies were born there. That courage really got me through COVID and all the lockdowns. So it's a part of our history that has to be told from an Indigenous perspective by an Indigenous writer, not a white writer.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to add to that, there's a layer of race in there that can be articulated when we think about leprosariums, but isn't necessarily articulated when we talk about, say, COVID. But predominantly the areas that were highly policed or locked down were areas of high proportions of Aboriginal people in the last 2 years. And I think that's the reason we keep writing, isn't it? So that we can challenge and truth tell and continue to add to conversation so that our people and all minorities aren't criminalised, dehumanised or locked up, which is something I'm really passionate about. Bindi is 11 and the age of criminal responsibility in Australia is 10. Black kids in Australia are disproportionately locked up compared to their peers, and so when I write about a kid like Bindi having all this freedom and joy in the world, it's to try and challenge the ideas of what people expect of Aboriginal children in Australia. And she plays hockey and she rides horses and she goes yabbying and, hangs out with her friends. And, I think they're important things.
Well, thank you.
Beth's given us the wave. Sorry. Hey, that's a nice wave.
We really need to hand it over to you now to see if there are any questions. Please ask anything of the panellists, please.
Yeah, I mean, Blak with a K is a colloquialism that mob use when we're talking about Blak as in Aboriginal people in Australia. And I think it's a reclaiming of the word, which is a pretty fierce and proper thing. These have been words that have been used against us, and this is us saying, now we are. Yeah.
I think it also just, does it also like, you know, as in a different black people to other people of colour? Yeah, so it's that as well.
Thomas, you said you worked as a wharfie for, was it 10 or 20 years? I just wanted to ask, were you like treated any worse than the other people working there because you were of Aboriginal descent?
No, not on the wharf. It's one of the reasons why I loved being a wharfie. Wharfies in this country have been very progressive. They've supported First Nation struggle for many, many years. For example, have you guys heard of the Gurindji Wave Hill Walk-Off and Vincent Lingiari? So when the walk-off happened, the Darwin Wharf workers were already there in solidarity with them. So we'd said, you know, we're going to be there and back you up. Met Vincent in the Darwin Hospital just before the walk-off, and said the unions are going to come and support you. And so, yeah, on the wharf, I really had quite the opposite, mate. You know, I was a quiet fella, and being on the wharf, they really helped me find my voice by backing me up and my people. Yeah.
My question is, I would like a volunteer. There's got to be someone who's willing in the audience. So these authors are talking about the question, why are black stories important? If someone asked you that question, what would you say to them? Is there anyone who is willing to answer that question?
So for me, I'm on a bit of a journey finding out about my family, which has been lost because they were all removed. So I guess it's important for me, you talk about truth telling, and I feel like so much truth has been hidden for such a long time. And as a teacher, I feel a real responsibility. How can I get that truth out there? So for you guys, what's your advice? How can we get students connected to black literature? And if they're interested, where do they go?
Yeah, I think there's so many more First Nations writers now. There's so much good stuff for you to use in your classrooms. You know, I think Bindi is a great one. Anything Muggabala books, you know, they've got loads of stuff written by First Nations writers. So I think that's very, you know, there's those sorts of things. I think the Uluru Statement itself as well is a great way to teach children about, you know, the history of our struggle in a very eloquent, you know, and brief way. It's 4.5 minute document to read. And I think the point that I want to make about that is that truth-telling in classrooms is so important because children are the ones that then go and teach the adults in their lives about what they need to do. And I think the very special thing about the Uluru Statement is that it says to Australia what should be done next. It doesn't say what the solutions are, it simply says that we should have a voice that the Parliament is forced to hear, and so that they can start to get things right by listening to us. And so I think this is something that's important to teach children because then they go and teach the adults. And I think you guys, you might even be voting age when we finally have a referendum to enshrine a voice. So that's some tips that I have, yeah. Thanks, and best of luck with your journey there.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Maybe check out the Love Oz YA resources as well relating to young adult fiction.
Yeah, also good luck on your journey. I would say like the Blackfellow Book Club on Instagram, Tila and Min are down here this weekend. You should definitely get along to some of their events during the festival. But I find them a great resource that I constantly flick over to teachers like, hey, these beautiful women and these powerful matriarchs in family and community are doing a lot of reading and they're sharing these stories. So that would be one thing. Reading Australia partner with Magabala and have teachers' resources accessible everywhere you go. They're brilliant. I would also say broaden and expand your idea of what literature is in the classroom, because films and screenwriting and playwriting are spaces that Black voices exist in droves, and they're really powerful. And also monologues or performances that come out of those spaces. I personally love oral storytelling, and hearing that audible, performative nature of writing is something that I was always drawn to when I was in the classroom. So all of those things, and get your poets. There's so many Black poets out there, and I think it's one area that has always been historically owned by dead white guys. As I said before, you know, we have to, the more that you use those books in the classroom, the more that you change the curriculum, and I think, yeah, all of those layers are important.
And I'd encourage you to go back to your school and find out, does my school have a reconciliation action plan? And if they have one, then be part of the solution, have a look at it, become familiar with it, and be part of the leaders actioning and developing and embedding it. And that's a great starting point, I think.
Got a question for Edie?
Yeah.
I was unfamiliar with the leprosy line that you were talking about, being a WA boy myself, man. Is there any evidence to show where that originated from? I mean, you drew to the parallels of the COVID stuff happening currently around the world, and they're saying, or the media is saying, that it's originated from Wuhan. Is there any evidence to suggest, I mean, I'm assuming where it's going to come from, but is there any evidence to suggest where leprosy may have come
So
from?
let me just clarify that. You're asking where leprosy came from?
Into Australia.
Yeah, that's... Yeah, you said Australia. Look, I have limited knowledge of the goldfields here in Victoria, but I think a bit of it came in through there. But in the Kimberley, they seem to think that it came in through the indentured labour that came from Asia to source the pearling industry in Broome. So they seem to think it came in through there, through that indentured labour, because a lot of it started a bit further down south, because before Broome became the pearling centre of the world, it was further south in a place called Cossack, where they had a lot of indentured labour, and then it flourished and moved to Broome. So they think it's through the indentured labour that it came in.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things about that is my understanding is leprosy was not, you know, something that couldn't be healed. You know, it's just the measures that were taken were quite extreme, you know, in comparison to what the actual disease was. And it was used as an excuse to lock Aboriginal people up and take them off country and put them out of the way as well. I think many people didn't have leprosy at all.
Yeah, it gave the authorities sweeping powers, and what it did was, I mean, you're right, Thomas, the measures didn't have to be as draconian, but it was all part of that political landscape about control. Let's control every facet of the lives of Aboriginal people. So it was a huge element of that was about control and oppression, and yeah.
Yeah, one of the saddest stories was Nolan Hunter told me how a couple of the old ladies had been there their whole lives, and when they shut down the leprosarium, they didn't know where to go or what to do. They were like, this is our home, like we've been here our whole lives. They sort of didn't know anything else. It was really sad.
There we are.
Hello, how you going? I just wanted to ask a question. I've lived the last 15 years on Larrakia country, Yolngu country, Warramunga Warlpiri country. And as a new teacher, I've moved to a really kind of regional town in Victoria. One of the questions that I struggle with is, because I worked for and with Indigenous people for so long, is how to teach Indigenous story in the classroom. And I really struggle with that question because it's not my story to tell. But I was just wondering if you had actually any advice for teachers telling Indigenous story and teaching Indigenous literature in classroom, because it's something that I'm really pushing from year 7 to year 12 at our school to include in our curriculum.
I think... Sorry, jump in. Go.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I write in the hope that my books are read by Australian students and taught in classrooms. That's why I actually write. I think that is for most writers writing young adult and children's books, we hope that our work gets an audience in classrooms across the nation. So one of the things is to look at the teacher resources. So my publisher is Magabala Books and also Allen and Unwin, and they go to great lengths to provide teacher resources. The other thing is you don't need to be Aboriginal to teach Aboriginal literature. You know, there's no hesitation in an Australian teacher teaching Shakespeare or work by an English author or any other author of any other nationality. So I don't know why there would be such resistance to teaching work authored by Aboriginal people. Again, there's so many Aboriginal people that want to be included in the teaching space. So is there an Aboriginal education worker in your school? Are there other online resources? Are there interviews with authors speaking about their books that you can pull in? I can bet my bottom dollar that if you're a teacher and you contact Kirli or Thomas, they would be able to, you know, to film a short message to the students, or Zoom in, or, you know, provide other statements through to you and students in your class. That is our work as authors. It's not only writing the books, it's communicating with our audiences.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's a beautiful answer. And just echoing, that we as authors often go into schools, and I think it's really valuable when First Nations voices get to tell stories as well. And there's so many ways that can be done through video and Audible and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. Perhaps in the communities, you know, invite elders to come in and tell stories orally as well. You probably already thought of that, but just what comes to my mind, yeah.
How are we going for time?
Soon. So is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I think we were going to round up on sharing what...
Oh, sorry. Got one more question?
Do you guys feel a great lot of responsibility when sharing and writing these stories? And how do you cope with the pressure of being the person to educate people?
Yeah, personally, I feel a huge amount of pressure to publish, you know, work and to share these stories and tell, you know, do truth telling, and it's a lot of pressure. I think what keeps me going, keeps me working, and publishing is that I just believe it's so important to share those stories. You know, there's a lot of work this country needs to do to heal, and that's what keeps me going. Yeah.
We're having a face-off. Yeah, no, I think I find, so I've narrowed down my purpose, and I work across like all kinds of different industries, from org transformation into writing, acting, everything. And so I think the thing that underpins all of that for me is that I feel like my purpose is grounded in the dreaming. I have a responsibility to share and tell stories so that we can create a more just world. And when I get tired and bogged down in it, think, oh, woe with me, like my life's so hard, I have to write this thing. I'm like, grow up, Kirli Saunders. You've got a gift and a responsibility. Go do your job. And so, yeah, I think I wake up feeling really grateful most days, and sometimes overwhelmed with deadlines. But I feel really lucky that I get to live in alignment with my dreaming and my purpose and share truth-telling with our communities.
How about you, Jared?
Yeah, with my this novel is about to be released in May. It's called My Spare Heart. And when I spoke to the publicist the other day, so she was the first person to read it kind of outside of my circle. And she told me why she loved the book. And the reasons why she loved it is exactly the reason that I wrote the book. Because this book is about young people who deal with parents, in this case, that have an addiction issue. So that is a big responsibility, to be able to write a story for young people that might have a friend or family member that has an addiction issue. So for me, it is a responsibility, and you have to be very careful with your research and your representations, because representations really count and can impact on how people treat each other. So my work is always a conversation with my elders in my community and then my peers and those people with expertise about particular subjects. It is a big responsibility, but you know, through my writing, I think I have been able to produce change. And yeah, when my work is connecting with tens of thousands of people in Australia and also internationally, it's something that I am very proud of.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I don't have a question. Well, if there's no more questions, I would like to just have you all say a big thank you and round of applause for Kirli Saunders, Thomas Mayer, Edie Wright and Jared Thomas. Thank you all so much. It was such a wonderful conversation to have, and we're so glad that you could be here to have this conversation, and also for the people who were watching online. We are going to have a short break now, but I will just let you know, you may have noticed there's a bit of a gap in the seating here. We do have some students who were unable to come today, so we've had to have a rethink about how we sort the groups for the workshops, and we will let the teachers know if there is a change to what you're going to be doing after the break, because we do have to discuss with the authors, because they've only just been told about this now. And then we'll have a quick chat with them and we'll reconvene. But for your break, it would be really good if you could just stay in this room here. Obviously, you're allowed to go to the toilet, but rather than sort of leaving the library and coming back, it would be good if you can stay here. So it'll just be a quick break. Maybe if we could meet back here at about 20 past 11, so it's only like 8 minutes, I know, but like if you can quickly have something to eat. We're not, you may have noticed I'm not cracking the whip about time here. We're pretty relaxed, so if you're still having something to eat, I'm not going to make you put it in your bag or anything. But if you want to stay around, good chance to go to the toilet, get a drink, and I will let you know our plans for after the break. But say thank you again to our wonderful panellists.